Arctic Search and Rescue. We have with us two witnesses in person. Shocking. Yes, we're getting so used to having people online that we have to swear them in and all that sort of stuff. So I'll call on Neil O'Rourke, Assistant Commissioner of the Arctic Region, to present for 5 minutes, and I'm assuming both Mr. Wright and Mr. O'Rourke be willing to answer members' questions after that. So, Mr. O'Rourke.
Bonjour and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Neil O'Rourke, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner for the Arctic Region for the Canadian Coast Guard. My colleague and I appreciate the opportunity to come here today to appear before this committee on behalf of the department and to have a conversation about icebreaking and then search and rescue. I am accompanied today by Mr. Rob White, who's the Director General of Vessel Procurement. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour parler des capacités de déglaçage de la Garde côtière canadienne dans l'Arctique. The Coast Guard's mandate is to ensure the safety of mariners in Canadian waters and the protection of Canada's marine environment, and support Canada's economic growth through the safe and efficient movement of maritime trade. We also contribute to our country's sovereignty and security, including in the north, through our presence in all Canadian waters. La Garde côtière canadienne est prête à intervenir 24 heures sur 24, 7 jours sur 7, et elle est active dans...
The Coast Guard is on a point of order. There's no translation. So the Coast Guard is active, particularly during the icebreaking time in the Arctic.
Elle est au cœur de notre flotte actuelle qui se trouvent nos brise-glaces. Jusqu'à 19 brise-glaces sont utilisées chaque hiver pour assurer...
And at the core of our current fleet is our icebreakers. Up to 19 icebergs operate each winter to make sure that marine traffic moves safely through the ice-covered waters.
...waters in the spring so that the fisheries can be open as early as possible while not compromising the life of mariners. And in between what we call the shoulder seasons, spring and fall, a number of those ice-capable vessels, which range from 7 to 9 each year, travel up and down to serve the Arctic. From facilitating the critical resupply activities, surveying the bottom of waterways so that hydrographic charts can be produced, providing marine safety for search and rescue environmental response missions, or contributing to Canada's Arctic sovereignty, these icebreakers have and will continue to be of critical importance to Canada's north.
Mr. O'Rourke, if we could slow it down a bit, because you're being translated simultaneously, and the translator is having a bit of difficulty keeping up. So
no problem. I apologize for that.
Thank you. No, it's no problem. Thank you.
Okay, so indeed, the criticality of these icebreakers cannot be understated. Comme le souligne le rapport récemment.
As outlined in the recently published Office of the Auditor General report on Arctic water surveillance, over the past 30 years, the number of voyages in Canadian Arctic waters more than tripled due to factors such as reduced sea ice cover and advances in technology, shipping, and tourism. We know that increased traffic means more possibilities and more risk, and an increase in demand for CCG programs and services.
One of the key actions we are taking is strengthening and renewing our fleet and increasing our capacity and presence in the Arctic in particular, thanks to the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Investments for icebreaking and ice-capable vessels announced through the National Shipbuilding Strategy to date include funding for 16 multi-purpose vessels, 6 program icebreakers, and 2 Arctic offshore patrol vessels ships. The Coast Guard will also be building 2 new polar icebreakers. They will be larger and more powerful than the current heavy icebreakers in our fleet and will enable the Coast Guard to operate in the Canadian Arctic throughout the year with enhanced capabilities to support a variety of taskings and provide a capability unmatched to date by the current fleet. And since we know not all the new vessels will be ready by the time the new vessels come online, we are also making important investments to extend the life of our current fleet. Known as vessel life extensions, or VLEs, we safely prolong the life of our fleet so that the Canadian Coast Guard can operate and have the proper equipment to perform their crucial work. In 2018, the Government of Canada awarded a contract for the acquisition and conversion of 3 commercial medium icebreakers. They're helping to ensure the continuity of service for Coast Guard's icebreaking operations and the safe passage of marine traffic through Canada's waterways. This year, we've also had the benefit of seeing the acquisition of a 4th commercial light icebreaker that will be ready to serve for the 2023 icebreaking season. These vessels will ensure uninterrupted service by Coast Guard while existing vessels are taken out of service to undergo vessel life extension work. One can view these 4 icebreakers called interim as car loaners. The principle is that we bring an existing vessel in the shipyard, but we have the use of these interim vessels in the meantime, just like you would do at a garage. To top this up, we have also started making use of third-party vessels, or what we call spot charters, through established standing offer contracts that allow us to draw down on these services if and when required. This allows us to supplement our fleet when demand exceeds our capacity. In closing, I am also proud to inform you that the Coast Guard is working to develop our first Arctic strategy based on 4 years of collaboration with Inuit, First Nation, and Métis partners as we stood up the Arctic region. This will provide a strategic direction to our Coast Guard members for the coming decade. We're aware that the decades to come will bring many more changes to the Arctic, and the development of such a strategy will be ever evolving. That being said, it is with this strategic planning that we position and strengthen the Coast Guard for the long term. The Coast Guard's working to ensure the organization is well placed to meet the expanding needs of our partners and clients. Thank you very much for your attention. Rob White and I would be very pleased to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner O'Rourke. First questioner is Mr. Brazan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our commissioners for joining us today and for your testimony. Now, we are seeing in the Arctic increased near peer and geopolitical powers congregating in the Arctic. What buildup of the Russian military in their Arctic, more capabilities in protecting their Arctic sovereignty and projecting that power. But we're also seeing China investing in their own People's Liberation Army Navy with heavy icebreakers, even though they're not an Arctic nation. They're a near Arctic nation and have interests there through the Belt and Road Initiative, and of course their interest in establishing their own strategy on what they call the Polar Silk Road. So, question for you is has Canadian Coast Guard provided any input or made any requests to the Government of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy?
With regards specifically to the Indo-Pacific strategy, it is not something that the Coast Guard has been, very involved in. I would need to confirm with some of my counterparts in headquarters to see if we had been engaged. It is not. I'm responsible for all of the operations in the north, but of course that kind of initiative would be managed out of our headquarters. So while I do not, to the best of my knowledge, believe that we have been participating in the development of it, we would need to confirm and get back to you.
Has the Canadian Coast Guard been engaged at all in discussions with other Arctic Council members as to how we deal with a more aggressive Russia in the Arctic, as well as the growing interest of the Communist Party of China in our Arctic by using both commercial vessels, scientific research vessels that have been transiting through the Northwest Passage, as well as their People's Liberation Army Navy icebreaking capabilities?
Thank you for the question. And with regards to our international collaboration, and in fact, we do work extensively with the other Arctic nations. Up until the beginning of 2022, and when there was the Russian reinvasion of the Ukraine, we did work with the total of 8 Arctic nations, so 7 others, including ourselves, including Russia, both as part of the Arctic Council and the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. So under the Arctic Council, as you are likely aware, there are different, there are different committees or themes, and one of them, the EPPR, Environmental Protection Group, is something that the Canadian Coast Guard leads on behalf of the Canadian government. So there's multiple departments that sit there, but we as Coast Guard are kind of the lead agency as part of that work. At the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, so this is a forum that exists between the Coast Guards of the 8 Arctic nations. Again, like the Arctic Council, the work was paused in early March following the reinvasion of the Ukraine. And we continue to have dialogues and conversations with the other 6 Arctic nations, both under the auspices of the Arctic Council, led by Foreign Affairs and GAC, of course, but the ACGF with the Coast Guards more specifically about a way forward in this changing environment. So we do participate as part of those 2 fora. In addition, we have bilateral relationships with all of the other Arctic nations, minus Russia. But we do work very closely, including with our next door neighbors, the U.S. Coast Guard District 17 in Alaska. I work very closely with the Rear Admiral, who's the commander out of there, and we talk about everything, including some of the issues that you've raised. And we also work very closely with the Danish Defence Forces and Joint Arctic Command base in Nuuk, Greenland. So essentially, for me, those are our next door neighbors from an operational perspective, and we do certainly compare notes on maritime domain awareness and such things related to the 2 countries that you mentioned. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to switch over briefly to shipbuilding, because you're saying that we got an order 16 mixed purpose vessels, 6 icebreakers, 2. Does that include the 2 new polar icebreakers, or is that 6 plus 2? And then also the 2 AOPs. And just wondering, what's the timeline, and whether or not the new, especially the polar icebreakers, are we going to be able to get them in the water before the Louis Saint Laurent expires its life expectancy?
Thank you for the question. To answer your first question, the 2 polar icebreakers are in addition to the 6 program icebreakers that we've got. The first polar icebreaker will be built at Vancouver shipyards, and we are currently doing the engineering work on that. Construction is slated to begin in 2025, and we're looking for delivery currently in 2030, in time to relieve the Louis Saint Laurent, which we have now doing some vessel life extension work in her off season, which will keep her going, and we hope to get her through the 2030 season. She'll be 61 at that point.
Okay. And so on top of that timeline on the polar icebreakers, what about the replacement on the other ships? Are we going to see any gaps in ability to project both search and rescue as well as the enforcement of Canadian law in the Arctic if we don't have our vessels and platforms to work off of?
Yeah. So
Very briefly, please.
Very briefly, the big risk out of all of this is the retirement of the Louis Saint Laurent before the Polar comes online. With the vessels that Neil mentioned before that we've got, we've bought, we can handle the low and middle Arctic well without that. But it's the high Arctic with the Polar that we're worried about if it doesn't get delivered, because that's the only place, the only 2 ships that can get up there are the new Polar and the old Louis Saint Laurent.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here with us today to answer some of our questions. One of the first questions I'm going to ask is, what are the main challenges that you experience in conducting search and rescue operations in the Arctic? And you mentioned, you started talking a little bit about a strategy working with Indigenous communities in the North and increasing their involvement, I guess, in the way that you do things. So if you can maybe elaborate a little bit on that and let us know how the collaboration may also help with some of the challenges that you're currently experiencing.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I guess maybe I'll start with a bit of the collaboration. So we work very closely with other federal departments. I think, as you're aware, for search and rescue, we work closely with the Canadian Forces as well. But what I actually want to focus on is our work with Inuit, specifically in the North. So we've made significant investments over the last few years to develop and expand our auxiliary, our Coast Guard auxiliary, which are essentially volunteers across the country that participate formally in the search and rescue system. In the north, it looks a bit different than it does elsewhere in Canada, where it's typically leveraging people who are already on the water, fishers and other people. In the north, there are a lot less community boats, if you will. And so we've also had a very successful program over the last few years where we've been able to procure or provide funding to communities to procure a search and rescue vessel to become part of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And so we're very happy now to have 32 communities participating in this, 46 vessels, and over 430 volunteers as part of our auxiliary in the north. So this is a really great asset for search and rescue, especially when it comes to community-based search and rescue. When you talk about some of the challenges, there are many in operating in the north. Right off the top of my head, I'll start with the distance. The Canadian Arctic is huge. On the one hand, it's a small place where Inuit travel, from community to community, and it is very well covered. But on the other hand, moving ships or assets from one part of the Arctic to another can take days at a time, and people don't necessarily appreciate that. In addition to the distance, one of the challenges is the communication. In most of Canada, we have what we call VHF radio, which essentially allows mariners on the water to communicate with the Coast Guard and our emergency services should they get into trouble. Outside of a few pockets in the north, that doesn't exist. And so what happens is that we respond to many missing hunter reports where a community is expecting a group of hunters to come home on a specific day, and they don't. And then they call us, and often, most of the time, the hunters are fine and have simply decided to delay their trip home, but they have no way of communicating with their home community, so they land up calling the search and rescue system. We activate, we deploy assets, which at a huge cost to the Government of Canada ultimately, and then all of this, in theory, could have been avoided if there was communication. So that's one of the challenges that we see that's a bit unique to the north. In addition, infrastructure and assets. So again, as much as we talk about the icebreakers, we have 7 to 9 operating in the north. When you look at the vast geography, it isn't that much when you're talking about coverage for search and rescue. And we have limited other support. So we have the auxiliary, which is really great and strong. In the rest of Canada, we have a layer of search and rescue, local search and rescue stations. In the Arctic, we have one Arctic Marine Response Station in Rankin Inlet. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of some of the challenges that we deal with.
Yeah, it helps a lot. Thank you. So I guess the main thing is limited infrastructure, limited connectivity, and can you speak a little bit to how increasing infrastructure investments in the north, especially during this period, would benefit the communities there as well as our defense position?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation, of course, I know here as well as in the north about building multi-use infrastructure, and we're certainly on that page. I know that in talking with our partners at National Defence and the Canadian Forces, there are possibly opportunities as there's investments in the modernization of NORAD. But at the community level, we also have those conversations. We're very well aware of some great work that's been done by ITK, the National Inuit Organization, NTI, Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, just to name 2 organizations on actually mapping out what the infrastructure gaps look like. And from our perspective, the areas that are aligned with Coast Guard and essentially marine infrastructure, we're very much in agreement with that is the kind of infrastructure that would be best help us as well as a Coast Guard to deliver services. So from our perspective, part of us standing up an Arctic region and having permanent capacity in the north was about changing how we did business, and that's really looking at being doing everything in partnership with Inuit First Nations and Métis. Thanks.
Thank you. You've mentioned how climate change also has changed the reality in the north, has made it more accessible. What are the plans going forward to make sure that we still are able to protect the Arctic and Canada, I guess, through the Arctic? And how are we involving Indigenous communities in that plan?
2 questions in a little less than 30 seconds, please. Thank you.
Okay, I'll touch on that. There's a lot of stuff in there. The first thing I'll say about climate change is that things are changing, and there's sometimes a misperception that melting ice means that there's a much longer navigation season. What we're seeing actually is increased risk because multi-year ice that used to stay much higher north is now breaking off and coming south, and we don't necessarily know week to week. 1 week in a specific area historically, the conditions would be pretty much the same. Now we're sometimes seeing ice in 1 year, no ice in the next year, and that's really complicated for voyage planning. With regards to how do we...
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lambropoulos is young, but she's learned. She's very clever. Yes. Mr. DeLille, bienvenue au comité. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, and good morning, colleagues. I have a few brief questions. There are 19 icebreakers, Mr. Rourke. How many are functional as we speak?
OK, alors on a
We have 19 icebreakers in our fleet nationally. It depends on the month or the week of the year because we try to, much as to the extent possible, to do servicing during spring and fall. And so we have icebreakers on the St. Lawrence and in the north. But how many are functional during the coldest period of the year? I'll have to get back to you with information later on. I'm an expert on what's happening on the Arctic, but once again, it depends on the year. But we can get back to you if you were asking a question about this particular year. But unfortunately, I don't have that data now. The half of the icebreakers? No, it's less than that. Less than half. Okay. Less than half. Is that adequate to ensure the security of Canada? For the time being, if we look at our Arctic fleet, we find that the ships that we currently have that are available, it's adequate, enabling us to provide our services in the north. What do you mean for delivering our programs? Well, that means it starts with icebreaking. Every year, there are about between 5 to 20 requests for icebreaking in the north. In addition, we have a platform that helps Canadian scientists. So we have some ships that are dedicated to that. So our magic number is between 7 and 9 icebreakers, but we can provide that amount. I would like, you talked about the Auditor General's report, which talked about the deficiencies in infrastructure. And he was looking at the fleet operational services. He said there are risks for procurement. Do you share the Auditor General's concerns?
So there are risks in the provision of the new fleet, and there will continue to be, bringing on Davy when they get under the umbrella agreement and start building our program icebreakers, and there will continue to be risks, but there is sufficient mitigation put aside in terms of the purchase of the new to us icebreakers that Neil mentioned, that we are confident that we will be able to continue to send 7 to 9 vessels to the Arctic as required, and keep the St. Lawrence as well down into the Great Lakes open until the new fleet arrives.
Given what's happening geopolitically, given the Russian arsenal, which is quite impressive, these 2 polar icebreakers, I believe there'll be 2 that have been ordered. Do you think that they're up to, do you think that will enable us to meet the needs for Canada's security? Thank you for your question. I will tackle this question a few ways. As you know, the Coast Guard plays a significant role when we talk about Arctic security in Canada. But we're not a military outfit. We work closely with the armed forces and with the RCMP. So I can't really speak to the entire question as to whether we have this capacity. But if I look at the security aspect we're responsible for, the environmental protection, yes, I do believe with the two polar icebreakers and with the investments that we're making, it will meet our needs for the future. The other thing I'd say is the work that's been done with the Arctic Council Forum. Last year, we participated in an exercise, including Russia, and what we learned is that there is no country, including Russia, that would be able to meet a search and rescue mission in the case of a cruise ship needing help. Nobody has the capacity to do that by themselves. So this is something we're working on together, the 8 countries, now 7, to deal with this reality, because there will be an incident. Cruise ships are already starting to go into the Arctic this year. Unfortunately, your time is up.
Actually, it's a good segue. Because I was interested. We have heard, and thank you for being here today, sorry. We've heard a lot, actually, about that increase in terms of the traffic and certainly as it relates to cruise ships. Ultimately, as that Arctic opens up, the interest in the extraction of natural resources is going to be very, very high. And so do you believe that it would be beneficial for the government to start to limit what that traffic looks like, including, commercially, in terms of extraction and that tourist aspect, also considering the environmental impact it has on the Arctic itself?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I don't think it would be necessarily appropriate for me to weigh in completely on all aspects of it from my role in the Coast Guard. That being said, I certainly can speak a little bit about vessel traffic. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that we often hear about big percentage increases in the OAG report. Very accurately, it says it's tripled. But what we're talking about when we say doubling and tripling is maybe instead of 1 vessel coming by a day, 2 are a day. Right? It isn't the 417 or the 401. So I think that's just important to keep in mind from when we talk about vessel traffic. From our perspective, one of the things right now, Transport Canada has rules in place with regards to the carriage of AIS, which allows us essentially to track vessels. The rules that are in place right now do not require small vessels. So any ship that has less than 12 passengers or any smaller, sailboat or yacht or those kinds of what we call adventure tourists in some cases are not required to carry any AIS or have that on board. And so what happens is that we see that some of those folks that come through the north will work with us, and they'll actually check in on a daily basis to let us know where they are for safety purposes. But others don't, and they'll just come in to our waters, and we don't necessarily know where they are, and then sometimes they get into trouble. And so from a search and rescue perspective, we'd certainly be in favor of having a better capability of knowing where some of these smaller vessels are at all times, so that when there is a problem, we can kind of skip the search part and get right to the rescue part, which in the north and in cold waters can make a difference between life and death. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're kind of talking about. I might also just mention that any conversation about limiting ship traffic in the north would probably be viewed by other nations who I know have made it very clear to us and in Coast Guard and others that they have different views on the Northwest Passage than our. There are internal waters, of course, for Canada, but not everybody, sees that perspective, and necessarily, they might have things to say about any additional changes to the regime, if you will, in the north with ships.
You talked about that relationship in terms of the Arctic Council. It being on hold has caused a lot of issues, even just in terms of gathering data and research. We've talked about, and we've had witnesses come forward in this committee talking about how vital the Russian people see their Arctic as part of their identity. Now that in 2023 there will be a change of leadership. What do you think in terms of that relationship going forward and the continuation of the Arctic Council without Russia's involvement? What do you foresee in terms of problems with that?
Well, I think, with regards to the Arctic Council, ultimately, again, I mean, from my perspective, it's not for me to kind of weigh in on exactly what the future should look like. However, I will, talk about it from our Coast Guard perspective. And I'll come back to that example that I gave about the cruise ship at the North Pole. So our reality right now is that if there is an incident at the North Pole that requires, an evacuation of a cruise ship, we will have to work with Russia. Because we, as again, some of you may be aware, but Canada and all the other Arctic nations have signed on to an international search and rescue and environmental response agreement, or MOSPA agreement, which essentially has the Arctic divvied up amongst the 8 nations. And so we have a responsibility internationally to deliver on search and rescue right up to the North Pole, but so do the Russians on the other side, and then, of course, the Americans and the Danes. So again, realistically, if there is an incident that happens in the North Pole, we will need to work with them. So I think from our perspective, while appreciating and understanding, of course, the geopolitical reality right now, we come back to that reality that whether we like it or not, we may be put into that situation. And as a general rule, for us, exercising and communicating with partners in advance of an incident is going to likely lead to better outcomes in the incident.
Okay. And in the very limited time I have left, across the board, and certainly in terms of the CAF, we've seen numbers declining for recruitment retention. Are you seeing the same in the Coast Guard? And also, you had mentioned that you supplement your fleet with third-party vessels. What sort of training are expected or provided to them when they're dealing in such dangerous waters?
There must be a pattern here. 2 questions in the last 30 seconds.
I'll get into the personnel one a little bit. So I think we're in a bit of a different situation than the Canadian Forces, and we haven't seen kind of a declining number. Now, that being said, I mean, the last few years, the number of Coast Guard members has actually increased. We still have, though, there's an international shortage of mariners, and so certainly, recruiting and hiring enough people to be able to operate all the new vessels that we talked about is really one of our top priorities, if not our top priority at this point in time. So certainly is something that's top of mind, again, because we're operating in an environment where internationally there's a dearth of mariners. We also know the Navy is also recruiting, domestically, as are we. But at the same time, we don't have a situation where we've necessarily seen a decline. Although I will say that, there are situations right now where there's specific trades such as engineers, cooks even, that sometimes we have been forced to tie up ships because we are short a cook or an engineer, and we are just not able to find one within our complement. So it certainly is an issue for us, and we are very focused on trying to make improvements.
Ms. Matson. Mr. Lewis.
Well, thank you, Mr.
5
Chair.
minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here at committee today. I would start off by saying, ironically, I used to sit in foreign affairs, not foreign affairs. I'm sorry, industrial. Oh my goodness! Thank you so much, International Trade Committee. Before I was transferred over to Transport Committee, and so right before I left International Trade, we were studying actually the Indo-Pacific strategy, and I know there's a lot of discussion around that. So the first question I would have, and by the way, gentlemen, thank you very much for your service to our country. The first question I would have through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. O'Rourke. So a follow-up to Mr. Bazan's question earlier with regard specifically to the Indo-Pacific strategy and our northern gateway with Russia and China. And I know that you mentioned you didn't have an answer to that question. Perhaps this committee could get a written response. Would you be willing to do that, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I will just note that we do work. I mentioned the Arctic Coast Guard Forum. We also have a North Atlantic and a North Pacific Coast Guard Forum. So there is engagement and discussion, certainly with all of the partners around that, and that includes China and Russia at that forum. So we'd be happy to provide you a more detailed written response.
Do. Thank you so much. So how many times a year does the Coast Guard interdict foreign vessels in our Arctic waters without permission?
So under our Coast Guard mandate, we don't have the authority to do that. We are essentially the civilian fleet for the Government of Canada. So anything that is that would not require kind of an intervention from the Navy or a military vessel, the other departments might look to us. So we do work very closely with Transport Canada and the RCMP for this kind of situation. As an example, in the last couple of years, there were restrictions on cruise ships and adventure tourists being in the north because of COVID and the pandemic, and we did work closely with Transport Canada and other federal agencies, but at no time were we required to do an on-water interception of a vessel.
I'm sorry, my time is limited, and
Yep.
this chair makes sure that we stick right to it. It's all good. So does military ever go on the Coast Guard, or does the Coast Guard ever assist the military?
Well,
The reason I asked that, Mr. O'Rourke, is I know, ironically, so I'm from the Florida of Canada, is my riding, and our Coast Guard works incredibly close with the U.S. Coast Guard as well, and our officers work incredibly close. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Has there been an opportunity, or is there an opportunity in the future for for various agencies to work together? Does it happen today?
Yeah, it does. I think there's always opportunity to do more of that kind of thing. Starting with the U.S. Coast Guard, what you see in the south is also similar in the north. We work very, very closely with them as a partner. When we talk about the Canadian forces, we've had Navy personnel on board our icebreakers learning from our captains in advance of the launch of the AOPS. And so certainly there's an agreement between the Navy and the Coast Guard to develop our personnel and do exchanges. And again, we're looking at expanding that relationship. So that does kind of happen today.
Mr. O'Rourke, and so through you, Mr. Chair, so how often does the Canadian Coast Guard interact with the U.S. military and our Canadian military? Like, is there aligned training? Is there set dates for training, or is it just kind of pie in the sky? And if it is pie in the sky, that's okay. But what needs to be put in place so that we can leverage both opportunities?
Well, I think, first of all, when we talk about the Canadian military, we work very closely with them. So as an example, my office in Yellowknife is a 5-minute walk to the commander of JTFN, who I know will be here on Thursday. And we have, formal set meetings. We have informal discussions. And that's just, my relationship with JTFN. Here in Ottawa, we also have a relationship with CJOC, and, and I could go on. But suffice it to say, I think we have a very strong relationship between the Canadian Coast Guard and the Canadian forces. And we certainly do work together, but we're always looking at new opportunities to strengthen that collaboration.
And then my final minute, and I'm only going to ask one question, Mr. Chair, to make your day better. Well, what's the protocol for vessels operated by foreign state actors versus commercial foreign vessels?
Okay, so from our stand, I guess I'll start off with, it's Transport Canada's responsibility and their mandate essentially to kind of look at a lot of this stuff. Where the Coast Guard comes in is when vessels actually kind of show up in the Arctic. So we have a Marine Communication Traffic Services Center in Iqaluit that monitors all vessel traffic in the north. So from our perspective, we wouldn't treat one any differently than the other. We monitor all vessel traffic that goes on. That information is in part used for safety purposes. It's also sent to the MSOCs. The MSOC East in Halifax is responsible for all the Arctic and has multiple departments sitting there. And so that information would go to them and is then used by a myriad of departments and agencies in Canada for different purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for adhering to the time. And I guess we have to now look in our socks drawer to find out what's going on. Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes. That was pretty bad, wasn't it?
I didn't get that joke.
Yeah.
From a guy that delivers a lot of bad
That
jokes.
was
I
a
didn't
lame
get that
dad joke, yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And I'm going to pick up on some of the things that Mr. Lewis was talking about. And he sort of went back and forth between the U.S. military and the Canadian military. So I'm just going to try and sort of sew it up a little bit and get some of your thoughts. You talked about how you work with transport and you work with RCMP. You said you're a civilian fleet, and by virtue of being a civilian fleet, you're not a military outfit, was the word you used. But maybe you can kind of tie up in a nice bow how the Canadian Armed Forces and the Coast Guard do work together in the Arctic for Canada's interests at the north and for the Canadians that do live there. Because I know you were back and forth a little bit with Mr. Lewis on the U.S. comparison, and I'm a big fan of comparing U.S. Coast Guard, which is a military organization, with Canadian Coast Guard, which is not. And I've often sort of just joked that if we threw a pistol in the glove compartment of every vessel, we'd hit our 2% pretty quickly. So I want to know if you could sort of tie that relationship together for me.
Okay. Talking about the Canadian military again, the relationship I think is both at the strategic and policy level. At a starting point, we have 1 day a year where the senior command staff of the Coast Guard and the RCN get together and have conversations about things we have in common. The last conversation we had, we spent half the time talking about the Arctic. So just to give you a sense, and it flows all the way down to at the more junior operational levels, Op Nanook, which I'm sure is something you're all very familiar with, that's run by the Canadian Forces, but very much supported some elements of that by Coast Guard, and so our planners work directly with JTFN planners, for example, to develop those scenarios and those exercises. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of the really broad relationship. As you might suspect, our relationship with the Navy is a lot closer than it was with the Army and the Air Force, just because of our mandate, and we all operate on the water, and we have a lot in common as the two organizations responsible, federal organizations responsible for being on the water for Canada. So hopefully that answers the question. And tying back, I know you mentioned the military and law enforcement and all the rest, and I'll point out that of the 8 Arctic nations, and I am including Russia in this, Sweden and Canada are in fact the only 2 that don't kind of have a constabulary role or some kind of military or law enforcement role, and so we're very familiar with the conversations, both from an international conversation, but also domestically, because again, that Arctic security conversation that's happening in the North, in the North American North, is happening in Alaska with U.S. military, U.S. Coast Guard, with our Canadian military, our Canadian Coast Guard, and it kind of it's a conversation that happens. It's an ongoing conversation through governance conferences, formal bilaterals, etc. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So the capabilities that DFO and the Canadian Coast Guard bring to northern operations, can you sort of brief the committee on those and the roles that these capabilities would play in marine surveillance, navigation, and I think you were talking quite extensively on search and rescue with Madame Lambropoulos earlier. I don't know if you had a chance to finish your thought on the comments you had with her.
Well, there's a lot of excellent questions, so a lot of information I could share here, but I think So talking about our capabilities, it's going to start with our people and our assets, and I also want to talk about relationships quickly. So I'll try and squeeze that really quickly. So the assets, you've heard about the ships. We have radar towers. We have a series of aids to navigation, buoys, and other such things to either assist with communication or try and avoid navigation accidents. So that's kind of a lot of the asset side of what the Coast Guard brings to the table. We also have a permanent Arctic region set up as of 2018. And so we have a permanent presence all year round in the Arctic, and building on the relationship side of it. For us, those relationships, we've talked a lot about the international and domestic federal relationships, but we also have very important relationships with the territorial governments, and very importantly with Inuit, First Nations, and Métis communities, but also with their Indigenous and/or Inuit governance structures, which include land claim organizations in many parts of the Arctic. And so we across the board have, I think, very strong relationships again with all those different layers and levels of government, right up to the international, and then we also bring people and assets there. DFO has some of the same. We are amongst one of the most federal presences, or the most present federal departments, in the North, along with perhaps Canadian Forces, RCMP, and so we are often asked by other federal departments. Sometimes it can be simple questions around relationships. Other times it could be, is it possible for us to do a certain thing, part of our mandate, off of your ship?
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Monsieur Delisle, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Juste de dire.
My name is pronounced Desilets. Desilets. No problem. Earlier, if I understood correctly, you said that the Coast Guard was not able, if there was a major incident with a cruise ship, to come and help out in certain areas. And from what I understood, you said that no other country would be able to do so either. Yes, you did understand. I was talking about the North Pole specifically, but last year we did an exercise with a company, and what we found out was that for all Arctic countries, it would take 4 days before a ship could get to that location. So that's why I said that it takes a minimum of 4 days to get there, and we see that there could be a problem there. But are there any cruise ships that could go that far? Yes, this year there are a couple. Maybe a helicopter service to help them. And the search and rescue system in Canada and the armed forces could step in if ever there's a problem. Probably what we would do is that we would send a helicopter up there and send in people until the icebreaker could arrive. But we wouldn't be able to evacuate several hundred people without a ship. We've not experienced such an incident yet. Is that correct? Back in 2008, there was an incident, but it was in a more southern part of the Arctic, and it wasn't the same situation as well. But we had to evacuate a couple hundred people on a ship, but there were no earlier. I don't know if it was you, Mr. White, or pardon me.
For NDP 5. Okay.
Je poursuis.
May I continue? Yes, go ahead. Earlier, you talked about the Louis Saint Laurent ship, and it will be replaced in 2030. Is that correct? Is there any plan should the Louis Saint Laurent not be able to operate until 2030? And yes, we do have a game plan for that. We have interim capacity, and we have this vessel life extension program. So we're confident that with this work that's being done, we'll be able to deal with this. Thank you.
Matheson, 2.5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, I think I would like to actually go back to the question that I wasn't able to get in, or you weren't able to have time to answer, in terms of, you had mentioned that you are supplementing your fleet with third-party vessels. How do you ensure that they have the training that's required? Do you need more supports in terms of that, or are they sort of a take-it-as-they-come kind of situation?
So the vessels that we are contracting out for that are southern vessels as opposed to northern vessels. So they would operate principally along the St. Lawrence River. And within the contract that we let, we specify that they meet Transport Canada guidelines in order to operate within Canadian waters. So they are independent from us. We're just contracting them. Typically, we cascade our vessels in such a way that these are smaller. They're given things like breaking out ferries or breaking across ferries, while our bigger ships are maybe taking a larger ship down and breaking a track for it out down the St. Lawrence or across the Gulf. So this is when we've got more ice than we can deal with. We contract with the smaller ships, and they do the smaller stuff for us.
Okay, so that doesn't happen in the north where there's potential dangers in any way, shape, or form?
No, we do not contract for third parties in the north.
Okay, that's good to know. In terms of we had heard last meeting about the Nanisivik Naval Station. Do you have a lot to do with that station? It's not open that often. They only, I think, 4 weeks of the year. In terms of the money that's being put into it, the expectations on it, how do you work with that station, and how can we ensure that it's more useful to you?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. So the Nanisivik refueling station is not yet open. So the plan is that it's going to be a period of time, maybe 4, maybe 8 weeks, depending. So it is, I think, as you're well aware, a D&D project through and through. From the Canadian Coast Guard perspective, though, we've been using that location actually for years as to lay down equipment, especially for some of the operations that we have to do in the high Arctic. The way that we are working with the Navy and D&D is that we will also use it as a refueling station. And we will, in fact, close down the refueling station because we're up there longer typically than the Navy is towards the end of the season. And so we actually have an agreement with the Navy that we will close down, take the fuel out at the end of the season. And so that's essentially the relationship. So at this point in time, we aren't using the facility for refueling. But what we do right now, we essentially refuel ship to ship in the north, and we're going to be able to at least remove some of that ship to ship fueling that occurs today by using the Nanisivik facility
Thank
once it's open.
you.
and running.
Thank you, Ms. Madison. Ms. Rempel Gardner, thank you. Welcome to the committee. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. Earlier in testimony, I think I heard something about how your agency may have to rely on Russia for rescue should a major incident requiring rescue occur if your agency didn't have the capacity to reach the vessel. Is that correct?
I might, thank you for the question. I might frame it as not that we would need Russia's assistance, but if it's something that is happening at the confluence of where our areas of responsibility are, which is the North Pole, that we would likely have to be multiple countries to respond. So it's really specifically with regards to an incident at the North Pole that I would say that I don't think any of the Arctic countries has the capabilities alone to take care of it.
Has your department conducted any analysis on how likely this is to occur?
I don't think we've done detailed assessments. Essentially, at this point in time, we've seen this year two cruise ships go up for the first time. One of them went last year, but with no passengers.
Is there a reason why you don't have regular analysis of the likelihood of an incident like this occurring?
Well, I think it really comes down to the fact that we've had 3 ships go up there ever. So I would suspect, it's something we would do in the future as we would see increasing vessel traffic. But right now, there haven't really been any vessels transiting.
What time frame are you anticipating increased vessel traffic to the point where that type of regular analysis would occur?
It would be hard to say. I mean, we do kind of informal risk analysis at all times. We have very detailed system for search and rescue called RAMSARD that we look across the north and do use that as a tool. And that's something that we're going to be in the Arctic launching for the first time as of next year.
Is our existing fleet of surveillance equipment, ships, et cetera, is that adequate to meet the potential demand of, let's say, 10, 15 years in the future in that type of scenario?
Well, right now, I think most of our monitoring is actually not done using the ships themselves. I mean, they do have communications equipment, but we use satellite-based and shore-based technologies. And yes, we do believe. I think, as the OAG report has pointed out, and we've certainly, provided some leadership in the federal family around the Arctic Maritime Security Strategy. Okay.
Has anyone in your department provided advice to the government regarding contingency plans should the existing fleet of key satellite ships or aircraft cease to operate before they are replaced?
So I think through the shipbuilding program, we've absolutely provided, some contingency, and that is kind of what led to the 3 interim ice breaking and the 4th.
Recently provided specific advice to the government regarding contingency plans for critical failure on any of the existing fleet of critical infrastructure, as outlined in the OIG report.
The second one is NSA.
Is there a reason why this hasn't been provided? Has the government asked for contingency plans for potential failure of infrastructure like satellite ships or aircraft for monitoring?
I might propose that we get back with a written response to that. I mean, I think ultimately on the ship side, what we would say is that we did provide that advice. There was an investment made, and it's so that mitigation that we requested has now been addressed.
The plan for fleet renewal was developed in 2018, 2019.
Has it been updated since? Has any advice on contingency plan been updated over the last several years?
No, we still consider the plan to be a solid plan and have not updated it past that point.
Has it been updated in the context of an increased use of asymmetric competition by China and Russia with regard to Arctic strategy?
I know it hasn't. I think from our perspective, the focus is on our capabilities to deliver the programs that we're mandated to do here in Canada, and that's how we've been using it, and that would be...
Has China's focus on asymmetric competition informed any contingency planning for critical failure of key equipment in your department in recent years, since 2019?
I'll say yes to that. I think that one of the things that we've certainly seen from other countries is there some of the technological capabilities, and so
analysis with committee.
No, I
Point of order,
sorry.
Mr. Chair. Point of order. Look, I know that, if I can be recognized, Mr. Chair, I know that Ms. Rempel-Garner, it's her time, but she's asking a litany of questions. I believe our witnesses are doing their best to respond, and before the witness is even able to get through the question, he's being interrupted. I would like to be able to hear the answer to the question. I know that that's a careful balance that needs to be struck by the chair to make sure that she has her time to be able to answer the questions. But I do think that hopefully we can find that balance so we can actually hear the rest of the answers.
Generally, I regard the witness's time, or the member's time, as the member's time, and ask questions as they see fit. But I must admit that the rapidity of the questions was starting to, I wasn't even sure I was understanding the questions. So
Well, Chair,
we'll finish off the 5 minutes, but I take
not the
note
first
of
time
the
I've been shut down by a Liberal, and I'm sure it won't be the last, as a woman particularly. Thank you. Would you be able to table with committee any analysis or advice that the government has provided, your department has provided the government with regard to contingency planning for critical infrastructure failure, particularly in the context of an increased posture of asymmetric competition by Russia and China?
Yeah, we'll be able to go back and provide what there may be. Just on the last point, I would say when I talked about, we have a policy, I guess, of using new technology, but also using old school ways of doing things. We don't have a specific analysis that tells us that we should do, but understanding the capabilities of other countries to interrupt things like AIS and GPS, we're ensuring that our mariners are familiar with the old methods of doing things without technology. Thank you.
Mr. May, final 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our witnesses for being here, providing your amazing testimony today. Going last in the panel, you tend to have heard many of the questions that I was hoping to ask. So, thank you to those who covered a lot of what I wanted to speak about. But if I can bring us back to the Coast Guard. And particularly how you're adapting to changing climate in the north, and what trends are you monitoring and planning for in terms of vessel traffic, protecting the marine environment, ensuring public safety, and supporting Canada's security and sovereignty. I know there's a lot there, but and much you may have touched on, but I want to give you an opportunity to kind of summarize all of that.
Okay, thank you for the question. So with regards to climate change, I would say we continue to monitor the actual conditions, and specifically our interests are the ice conditions with respect to capability of navigation. So I think that's where a lot of the focus is. We work very closely with, as I mentioned, Inuit, First Nation, and Métis, and listen a lot to their perspectives on what they're seeing in their individual communities. We are, incorporating that feedback in any conversations around new infrastructure that could, exist in a certain location, and even places where we might make future investment to support our polar icebreakers or other, the fleet of the future. Where are the best locations, understanding that the climate's evolving. The other thing that I would say, and specifically with regards to our national shipbuilding strategy, is that we're building ships for an uncertain future. We have a very good sense of what our mandate is today, but also appreciate that over decades that might evolve and change. And so we're trying to build ships that are going to be adaptable, that are with a modularity concept that's essentially going to allow us to have the right asset for whatever the Government of Canada asks us to do in the future.
Thank you for that. I want to just maybe use the last couple minutes of my time here to ask you and to follow up on some of the questions that were asked by both Bloc and NDP colleagues about tourist traffic in the north. I've been seized with this issue for long before I was even on this committee. My riding of Cambridge has a company called Exact Earth that is in the business of tracking vessels. And a number of years ago, I was in their operations room watching the first ever cruise ship across the Northwest Passage, and there were several federal departments that were very keenly focused on that and concerned about that. when we're talking about this type of travel, you talked about, it's an issue of distance and capabilities. Potentially 4 days to rescue a vessel that it seems to be growing in terms of their capacity, in terms of size, given that the ice is melting and they're able to actually navigate these waters. Is this a conversation we should be having at the Arctic Council to say, look, we understand the rules of these types of passageways, and that we can't say no necessarily to these types of passages, but should we start having that conversation, because it's not a question of if one of these larger cruise ships run aground. It's a matter of when. There is not a cruise line in existence today that does not have, or that has, a perfect record. Every single cruise line has had a situation where there's been a ship run aground. Every single one of them. So what can we do? Should we be having that conversation at that Arctic Council or somewhere else?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think with regards to decisions on whether or not Canada wants to, change rules, might be better directed to, Foreign Affairs, or GAC, or Transport Canada. What I can talk about, is more about the response and the planning side. And we work extensively with the cruise ship operators. So all the cruise ship companies that are operating in the Canadian Arctic right now, we have a relationship with them. And over the course of the 2020 and 2021, when they were not allowed to operate in the Arctic, we actually kind of doubled down and did a lot of tabletop exercises with them with regards to getting back to regular business for them this year. So we expect that those relationships will certainly pay dividends if and when we get into a situation where there's a real live exercise.
What requirements do they have?
Mr. Mayor, your time is up.
Thank you.
I just wanted to thank both of you on behalf of the committee, Assistant Commissioner O'Rourke and Director General Wright, for your testimony before the committee. It's informative. It was very rapid at some points. And we thank you for your willingness to share your insights with the committee. With that, colleagues, we will suspend and re-empanel once we are all connected up with technology. Thank you again. Mr. O'Rourke is up for a second round of punishment, and he'll be staying. Joining us now is Dale Hirsch, President of Civil Air Search and Rescue, along with Bill Ralph, National Administrator, and Dave Taylor, Director, all here by video conference. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm assuming Mr. O'Rourke is not going to make a second 5-minute statement, so I'll call on one of you to make your 5-minute statement. Go from there. Oh, he does have a statement. Oh, okay. Well, I'll call on you second. So with that, one of you are going to make a 5-minute statement, and we'll look forward to it.
We just go ahead and start?
Yes, please, Mr. Kirsch.
Okay, sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Dale Kirsch. I'm the president of the Civil Air Search and Rescue Association, CASERA, in Canada. CASERA is a Canada-wide 1,700-member aviation-based volunteer association. We're dedicated to providing air search support services 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year, primarily to the Royal Canadian Air Force. This includes searches for downed aircraft, and recently we've been doing more humanitarian efforts, and we help promote Canada's search and rescue program across Canada. Our volunteer makeup includes search and rescue trained pilots of civilian aircraft and remotely piloted drones, RPAS units. We also provide navigators, spotters, and other various key roles in our organization. Since 1986, our challenge is to provide search support services for Canadians that covers the entire approximately 9.985 million square kilometers of our nation. However, our operations provide a large economic benefit for Canada through our lower cost and quick response aviation-based organization. For example, one of the RCAF's C-130 Hercules can cost approximately $13,000 an hour to operate versus our costs of around $250 per hour to operate a small aircraft that can have a full search crew up in the air in a fraction of the time that it can take the military. Our membership is spread out into each member organization that we call MOs of our association. We have one MO per province and territory across Canada to run our search operations. This allows us to be prevalent in each section of Canada, including the large and vast northern areas like the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. For example, this past summer, we had various member training in the north conducted by our MOs and the RCAF for upkeep and readiness, which included Geohaven, located far north of Nunavut, above the Arctic Circle on the King William Island. In 1986, CASERA was incorporated and formed as a national association. The directors of the provincial and territorial associations met in Ottawa with representatives of the two federal departments that were sponsoring CASERA, the Department of National Defense and the Department of Transport. All parties signed the agreement that listed the support that the federal government would provide to the association and what the association would provide in return. From there, we have continuously provided search support and have explored innovative ways to be more effective, expanding our capabilities and looking at different ways that we can be a service to the RCAF and the rest of Canada. For example, our most recent activities include being at the forefront of implementing remotely piloted aircraft systems, RPAS, or drones, in search and rescue. Paired with Locate 8 imaging, video software, and other third-party applications, we now have another method for us to be effective at meeting the needs of various search conditions by embracing and adapting new technologies into the world of search and rescue. That being said, as an overview of who we are and what we do, A more detailed showcase of our organization and other related information about us can be found on our website at www.casera.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kurtz. Mr. O'Rourke, second 5-minute statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With your permission, there are some duplicate parts of my opening statement with the first one, and I could skip over that if you would. In the economy of time, yes. Okay, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Neil O'Rourke, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner of the Arctic region at the Canadian Coast Guard. I'm happy to be able to speak to you on behalf of the department. The Coast Guard is here to speak about the Canadian Coast Guard search and rescue capabilities in the Arctic.
Cooperative effort between federal, provincial, municipal, and territorial governments, as well as volunteer organizations. It involves searching for and assisting people, ships, aircraft, and other craft that are or are believed to be in imminent danger. The Coast Guard supports on-water safety and security by providing a first response to mariners in distress, marine disasters, and emergencies nationally, with one of the most effective maritime search and rescue systems in the world. However, the ability of the Coast Guard to conduct search and rescue in the Arctic is hampered by the vast geography, freezing temperatures, changing climate, and lack of physical infrastructure. The Canadian Marine SAR system is a shared responsibility supported by the air assets and personnel of the Canadian Armed Forces, along with the maritime and air assets of the Canadian Coast Guard and volunteers of the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary. The maritime component of the federal search and rescue system is the responsibility of the Coast Guard, and this includes federal waterways and oceans in the Canadian Arctic. In cooperation with partners, the Coast Guard operates the Joint Rescue Coordination Centers in the coordination and conduct of maritime SAR incidents in the Arctic through the provision of expertise and resources, such as maritime search mission coordinators, icebreakers, helicopters, small craft, as well as communications and alerting services to provide rapid response to marine incidents. Dans l'Arctique, au cours des 5 dernières années,
in the Arctic, over the past 5 years, the Coast Guard coordinated an annual average of 36 maritime SAR events. Nationally, the Coast Guard coordinates 19 maritime SAR incidents on an average day. The centers in Trenton and Halifax provide services to the Canadian Arctic. In response to the concern of increased vessel traffic in the Arctic and increasing demand for our search and rescue services, one of the key actions we are taking is strengthening and renewing our fleet, as we discussed earlier.
To enhance local incident response capacity, the Auxiliary is a key partner in ensuring the safety and security of users of the Canadian Arctic waters in relationship to maritime search and rescue. In July 2018, the Coast Guard opened its first ever inshore rescue boat station in Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, providing seasonal primary search and rescue coverage in the Rankin Inlet area. Since then, local crews have developed the capacity to respond to search and rescue incidents. Building on this previous investment, the 2022 Oceans Protection Plan renewal is providing Coast Guard with funding to be able to expand this successful initiative into the Arctic Marine Response Station, including the procurement of a new vessel. This funding will support the employment of additional crew members from the local community, extend the station's operational season, and procure this additional search and rescue vessel that's dedicated for Arctic operations and that will allow for an enhanced coverage area. This will also allow for the undertaking of additional infrastructure improvements to enhance operational capabilities in the area. The Coast Guard is committed to meeting the expanding need for search and rescue services in the North. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be pleased to answer your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Just before I call on Mr. Kelly, I saw Mr. Taylor adjusting his headset when Mr. O'Rourke switched to French. Are all three of you on the English channel? Okay, so everyone's good. Okay, good. Thank you. With that, Mr. Kelly, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. O'Rourke, in the earlier testimony, you were asked about vessel interdiction, and you mentioned that you do not have it is not your place to actually intercept vessels because you don't have constabulary power nor military authority. How long does it take if you are dealing with an illegal, some potential illegal activity to have constabulary capacity on board?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And so, ultimately, it's not so much about having the a temporary constabulary duty or capability, if you will. It's more about having the people with the authority on board the ship. So, in our situations, most common situation could be we might have someone who's a Transport Canada inspector on board a ship, for example, who has the authority.
When operating in the Arctic, do you normally have RCMP or Transport Canada or both present on ships?
We do not, typically. Okay. So we have the capability to do so when required for those organizations. It can happen very, very quickly. I mean, if it's something that's in an emergency situation, it's all about where the RCMP or Transport Canada member might be and the location. But I mean, if it's something just offshore where they already have a person on ground, I mean, you could get someone by helicopter onto a ship in 30 minutes.
Okay. How about illegal fishing?
So illegal fishing is something that would be more the purview of some of my colleagues and the rest of DFO. We do have, what I can say from the Coast Guard perspective, though, is that we do support the Conservation and Protection Program in that interdiction. And again, they are the ones that hold the mandate and would be on board the vessel.
In the Arctic, where you said earlier, you are normally the only, or really the principal agent of the federal government. If there are foreign vessels unauthorized or potential criminal activity or even an environmental potential pollution situation or something, you're the only vessel there, but you don't have the ability to intercept vessels. You don't have the ability to engage in police activity in the Arctic.
Yeah, essentially that's accurate. I mean, the information would go to the MSOCs where those other departments sit, and then a decision could be made by those departments with the authority to say, we need to get out there, and then they would, essentially request us to do so.
The Auditor General has said that we have incomplete surveillance, we have insufficient data, and very poor means of sharing data. Do you agree with that assessment?
We work very closely with the Auditor General on this report, and the Coast Guard supports the recommendations that were made. Ultimately,
agree with that characterization.
That there are improvements to be made in with regards to sharing of information. Absolutely, we do.
And that our surveillance is incomplete.
From that perspective, yes, I would agree with that.
So we don't do you think the estimates of Arctic vessel traffic are accurate? And if the surveillance capacity is insufficient and incomplete, how much confidence can you have, or do you have, in vessel traffic numbers?
We have very high confidence. It's really with regards to some of the smaller, yachts and leisure craft who don't have a regulatory requirement to have AIS on board, where it's possible that there are some that come in that we as a Coast Guard are not aware of. But for larger vessels, we have radar systems, we have AIS tracking, and we're very confident in the number of ships, larger ships that are entering the Canadian Arctic.
Why did the Auditor General has said that our surveillance capacity is insufficient?
Yeah.
And incomplete.
So my assessment, and again, having worked with the Auditor General in developing the report and reading the recommendations, isn't so much that from a Coast Guard perspective that we feel like we don't have the information to do what our mandate requires. I think what the Auditor General is getting at is that there are multiple departments that have a use for maritime information, that this is shared through the MSOC centers. That's the fusion center, but that there are opportunities for increased collaboration to give a better maritime picture across departments.
Very briefly for Mr. Kirch, and I'd also like you to weigh in on this, though. Mr. Kirch, when you are engaged in a SAR event or activity and you require rescue capacity or you require assistance beyond what your membership is capable of, what's the typical time to either be able to involve Coast Guard or the Air Force?
Well, it depends where it is. We're
talking about the Arctic.
We're tasked by JRCC, the Joint Rescue Coordination Centers, and in the Arctic, it's usually Trenton. We're in constant communication with them. Even up in the Arctic, we use satellite phones, and we're able to talk to them and get things happening. the actual rescues would be done by the Air Force, or possibly by the RCMP as well, depending on the area that we're working in or where the incident took place.
Pick an example then. I mean, are there some examples of SAR events? The Coast Guard just told us there were 36 last year that they were involved in, if I heard correctly. What's the normal, what would be a possible scenario of response time in reaction to an event?
Unfortunately, it's a good question. Unfortunately, Mr. Kelly has left you no time to answer it. But, I'm sure you'll work it in around the next time around. Mr. Bloss, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blois, like choice. So if you ever we'll get you down. Yeah, Blois, but...
It left and right. Yeah.
So I'm going to start with Mr. Kirsch. What would be the number of incidents as it relates to the Arctic per year that your organization would be responding to? Do you have that number available for the committee?
I actually don't have it right in front of me. Dave is in the Northwest Territories. Do you have any numbers, Dave?
Mr. Kirsch, as you could table that. I think that would be something interesting to the committee members, unless you have it, Mr. Taylor.
I can tell you that in the Northwest Territories, we respond to 6 and 12 requests for humanitarian assistance from the RCMP, and most years 0 requirements from the Air Force for.
Okay. And it was Mr. Kelly in his questions actually, I think, answered part of what I was wondering, which is the delineation of when you're actually called. It was this organization mentioned, JRCC. Mr. O'Rourke, would you have a sense of how often the good work that the Civil Air Search and Rescue Association, how often are they involved and brought in on a percentage basis? Do you have that number?
I don't, no. I think the JRCC essentially is co-run by the Coast Guard and Canadian Forces and uses all the different assets that are out there. It's something that we could certainly respond with data, but I don't have it with me. Thank you.
Mr. O'Rourke, essentially is the work of CARSA essentially to help identify, and then there would be a response from the Coast Guard or the Air Force as necessary to actually rescue the persons in question? Are they doing some of that rescue work itself? It seemed as though it's more identification.
It would be hard for me to comment on exactly what they're doing. I think that the main thing I would want to delineate is the difference between maritime and other search and rescue. And I suspect that a lot of the search and rescue that they're involved in is actually land-based and therefore not under the purview of the Coast Guard.
I'll ask you, Mr. Kirsch, what would be the delineation? Do you know what the delineation, how often you're called?
Well, we don't do rescue. So we normally would be doing searches, and I'd have to check the numbers to see what percentage of callouts we get, actually involve a rescue.
And what
in the Arctic and a lot of other places, like we do work for the RCMP all the time, so we are involved in searching for individuals, for hunters, fishermen, that kind of thing in the Arctic.
Mr. Kirsch, how big is your organization? So you mentioned it's volunteer driven, it's civilian aviators. How many either different planes or volunteers would you have at the ready to call as necessary?
So we have about 1,700 volunteers in Canada. We have several hundred volunteer aircraft that we used across Canada.
How many in the Arctic specific?
The Arctic, most of our work is done with charter aircraft or having our volunteers serve on military aircraft as spotters.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Rourke, I'd like to turn my questions to you. You mentioned in the last hour the difference between how many countries, Arctic nations, I think you referenced 8, it's us and Sweden who have a delineation between the military and the Coast Guard being a civilian organization. I thought Mr. Kelly asked pretty important questions about capacity to respond. Broadly, as quickly as you can, what are some of the public policy rationale why we wouldn't have some of our Canadian Coast Guard more involved and integrated in the military response to make sure that if your vessel is there, it can be a quick response and we do have the ability to intervene as necessary? Like, what are the public policy rationale why they wouldn't be brought together?
There is a danger here of getting into public policy from this particular witness, but if he feels comfortable responding on the public policy, I'm perfectly prepared to let the witness
Let me
go.
reframe the question. Countries that do have that integration, what are some of the benefits or how they respond in those instances that would maybe not be possible in Canada?
I think when we look at search and rescue specifically, I'm not sure that there is a benefit one way or the other. And I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I think, from a policy perspective, what I would say simply is that the Coast Guard delivers a lot of different services: environmental response, ice breaking, search and rescue, which are all internationally civilian in nature. So when these other organizations, these other Coast Guards, like the U.S. Coast Guard as an example, they have additional law enforcement and regulatory responsibilities that in Canada reside either with the RCMP or Transport Canada. And so it's really just a different model. I wouldn't say that we don't work as effectively because it's part of different parts of the organizations. We have very good relationships with the RCMP and Transport Canada.
Just two quick ones. I have about a minute and a half. Pathways, you mentioned it perhaps in your remarks. How often are Coast Guard boats actually patrolling, and is there regular patrol routes, and how does that differentiate? I know we're talking about search and rescue today, but I'm more curious about the regular pathways that our Coast Guard ships would make in terms of monitoring our coasts.
In the Arctic, we don't have specific patrols per se. We have ships that come. One of our ships comes from the west coast and always is essentially going through Alaskan waters, coming from the west. The other 6 come from the east. Our ships are deployed based on ice breaking requirements first and foremost. That also offers us an opportunity to kind of have some coverage for search and rescue and environmental response, and to support for other departments.
What would be necessary? You mentioned that you can bring RCMP and Transport Canada folks on. Is there merit in trying to have some of your officers also double as peace officers, or have that constabulatory authority such that can be response? Is that something that could be done within your organization?
It's not something that we have the mandate for right now, so we certainly work with those partner agencies, but we don't do exchanges, sending our personnel to their organizations at this point. But they do work very closely, whether in JRCCs, MSOCs, and those are places where our respective organizations work together side by side.
Mr. Blows? 6 minutes, Mr. Desilets.
6 minutes, Mr. Desilets. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing. Mr. O'Rourke, the situation that we're experiencing with China and Russia right now, does this concern you with respect to needs when the political situation will have an impact on actions? Yes, an impact, yes, with respect to the North Pole and Russia. Russia and China in the Arctic, Russia is a member of the Arctic Council, and also with the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and we're used to working with Russia in the Arctic area, except for the past 10 months. China, it's different because it's not really an Arctic country per se. They have an interest in it. Sometimes a Chinese ship comes into the north, and we observe what they do, but it's a little bit different. The relationship is different. Secondly, I'm not familiar with this committee, but it seems to me that for years now, we've been talking about Canada's ice-breaking requirements, and depending on which party's in power, that has an impact on what company they're going to deal with, etc. Do you have the impression that politicians are really aware of your requirements? Listen, as Mr. White said beforehand, for years now, we've been working on fleet renewal for years, and we have a plan. From our perspective, we're very happy that the decision was made to have money available to procure what's necessary to provide stability. We're happy Yes, obviously, there's a lot of shipbuilding that has to take place, staff that has to be hired, but we're happy that the decision was made, and now we can go forward. You're a really good politician, or you're very patient, because as someone looking from the outside, I find that we've really been lagging with respect to the contracts with the companies that are being chosen. Some companies aren't going to be able to deliver the goods. But I have a question. With a committee like this one, we're here to write a report and put forward recommendations based on testimony. But if you had an opportunity, given your status, to make one or two recommendations to us, what would they be? With respect to search and rescue, I'll answer. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. I will repeat what I said earlier. It would be the communication system. We need to have greater capacity in the Arctic to communicate with people who live there. They could help us. They could help, and we could help the communities. And when I look at the maritime SAR system in Canada, elsewhere in Canada, we have auxiliary services, we have icebreakers, but we also have a certain number of SAR stations that we don't have in the Arctic. The purpose of these stations is to have permanent staff there who have expertise, who can work with the local community and answer calls. Just to give you an idea, right now, when we get a SAR request, it means that I have to take the icebreaker away from its icebreaking activities and send it to the community. So there's an impact there. So if I look elsewhere in Canada, those are the two parts that we need. And what we have in the southern part of Canada is not the same as what we can offer in the north. And what would this communication system look like? What are the needs? What are the special needs? From a technological side, well, there's a few ways that we could answer that question. Look at the NFR system. When at sea, we use channel 16, but without the VHF system, we can't really communicate. So sometimes, and it depends where the location is. Every location can have different needs. I don't know what the word in French, but we sometimes have repeaters, sometimes we don't. That's important. And as I said, there's some technology that provides different opportunities for us. Thank you very much.
In terms of a continuation, actually, on that, it was noted that the Canadian Armed Forces or the Government of Canada is going to be putting into place the medium Earth orbit satellite or search and rescue system, but it's only in the implementation phase, as I understand. But how are you planning to work that into all of these different levels of communication?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I'm not sure that I could tell you specifically about that system, whether or not we're going to utilize and how. More generally, what I can say is that both for our Marine Communication Traffic Services Center in Iqaluit, which monitors all the traffic, and then those JRCCs that essentially monitor or manage search and rescue, from their standpoint, they certainly use information. Like, we use a lot of satellite-based information, but I couldn't tell you specifically whether we would utilize this one as opposed to other services. I think generally we try and gather information from a variety of sources, because sometimes one might go out. It also gives us an opportunity to ensure that the information we're gathering is consistent, because it may not always not all technologies. Sometimes there are, especially in the north, there can be service gaps, there can be coverage area issues, and so by kind of utilizing multiple technologies, we hope to have as full a picture as possible.
Okay. I think my next question will be for Mr. Kirsch. There was a mention that in terms of the 1,700 volunteers, a lot of the search capabilities come from charter aircraft. Could you give me a more of an idea of exactly like where you, I mean, in addition to the charter aircraft, where you get your volunteers from?
Well, in southern Canada, our volunteers use their own aircraft. For instance, I fly my own search and rescue. I'm available, basically 24 hours a day, almost 365 days of the year to go flying. I have another job, but I have a lot of flexibility. But when we go up north, where Dave is or Iqaluit, up in those areas, pretty much the only way for us to fly is to charter aircraft. We really don't have there's a couple of issues in the north. A lot of the airplanes that we use, the private aircraft that we use aviation fuel. It's called 100 low lead. In the Arctic, a lot of the fuel is turbine aircraft, so they just have jet fuel in all these different areas, so we can't even fly our airplanes up there. So the only practical ways are to charter aircraft or get the government to buy us aircraft that we could use up in the north. But then we're probably talking a couple $1 million per airplane to get a plane that would have turbine capabilities that we could use up in the north. Dave, do you want to comment on chartering?
Sure.
Just to caution, Mr. Taylor. Apparently, I've been told that there may be some issue with the translators hearing what you have to say. So we'll go at it slowly.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. We have members we have an operational unit in Yellowknife and in Nunavut. And both places, there are locally available charter aircraft, single engine and twin engine, that have range to cover near the community, but not the entire Arctic. We have about 100 volunteers in the Northwest Territories, and then there's more in Whitehorse and predominantly Iqaluit, Rankin Inlet, Resolute Bay, and Cambridge Bay in Nunavut.
So, as I understand it, I mean there is a huge shortage of pilots in every aspect of flight. I certainly have seen it in my commute to Ottawa. But what do you think a future recommendation that you could make in terms of the Government of Canada's investment into more pilots? I know if you're getting them and they're doing this on their own as volunteers, I mean that skill set is really quite maybe not unique, but certainly maybe not something that is as easily found. So how would the government deal with that in terms of future pilots that are needed?
If I could answer that for the North, I think the continued use of chartered aircraft is the appropriate solution, because if we purchased an aircraft, we don't have a volunteer pilot who could fly it, because there's just not that many capable, experienced, qualified individuals sitting around waiting. If you bought an aircraft for us up here, you'd probably have to hire a pilot to fly it. Down in southern Canada, it's totally different, because they do have pilots available volunteer pilots who could likely fly something. But for us, for the North, certainly in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, I think the solution is to continue use of chartered aircraft and volunteer navigators and spotters and search coordinators. That to me gives us the best bang for the dollar.
Thank you, Ms. Matheson. Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is going to be to Mr. O'Rourke. Just to clarify in some of the answers you gave earlier, the Canadian Coast Guard has no stations, permanent stations in the Arctic at all?
We have one permanent station in Rankin Inlet now that's open seasonally, and then we have our headquarters in Yellowknife. We have a base in Hay River, and we have our MCTS center in Iqaluit. So those are all permanent.
Okay, so how many of those, like with the opening of CIS, with more navigation occurring up there, is there any plans of having more, especially SAR stations across the Arctic?
Yeah, I think certainly, more SAR stations across the Arctic obviously is going to require investment. And so I think from our standpoint, and working specifically with Inuit, that Coast Guard and Inuit are very much aligned that to improve the system in the north, that would be the right place to make investment should investment come in the search and rescue program and system. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, because like I have, even though I'm a Prairie Member of Parliament, I do have a Coast Guard regional station. It's seasonal, and of course they fly in from BC the Coast Guard staff as well as SARTEX to be there. So now, does all the Arctic vessels that you guys are currently sailing have helicopter capabilities?
They don't all. Typically, most of the vessels that we send north do. So the Terry Fox, as an example, does not have a helicopter capability, and neither do some of the interim icebreakers. So, this year, as an example, 6 of the 7 icebreakers that were in the north had a helicopter on board.
Every ship can go out there, and for constabulary exercise, if you had to interdict a ship that's illegally sailing, you would have to go Transport Canada or RCMP. You wouldn't have the ability to ferry someone on and off with a helicopter.
Yeah, well, you're correct about that on that particular ship. What we would typically do is actually probably utilize a helicopter from one of our other ships. We also have a couple of shore-based helicopters that are often up there doing maintenance work, so we would look at using one of the other assets to transport people as required.
Now, when we talk about Greenland and the Danish Coast Guard, are they operating on the same basis as Canadian Coast Guard, being civilian, or are they also have more constabulary capabilities?
Well, in fact, they're neither, so they're beyond that. And their Coast Guard and their military is integrated. So when I talk about the Danish Defence Forces Joint Arctic Command, which is essentially the presence they have in Greenland, they're responsible for everything the Canadian Forces would be and everything Coast Guard is responsible for, and on top, some constabulary roles at RCMP. So in fact, they have a relationship both with JTFN, ourselves, and with the RCMP, and then we're trying on the Canadian side to coordinate between our organizations as well.
Comparison to Canadian Coast Guard versus other Arctic Coast Guards, are we the only one with a civilian force?
No, what I found in my experience working for Coast Guard, every Coast Guard in the world is different, and they all line up differently. They all have different functions. So specifically in the Arctic, Sweden also is a civilian force. The Norwegian Coast Guard, for example, is actually kind of part of the Norwegian Navy, but separate. I won't talk about the Russians. The U.S. Coast Guard, as I talked earlier, a combination of transport, Coast Guard, and RCMP, and then the Danes. So they really are all kind of different. And the Finns are the Finnish Border Guard. So they're actually, almost like a combination of CBSA and Coast Guard, if you will.
So when we are talking about, NORAD and modernization, looking at better security in the Arctic and having more awareness up there, and NORAD's been expanded to include not just aerial domain, but maritime domain as well. So right now, if you go down to Colorado Springs, you walk in U.S. Coast Guard's in the NORAD building, and they're part of the day-to-day operations. Canadian Coast Guard, of course, is absent. So knowing that there's greater threats in the Arctic, we know that there's greater challenges with commercial traffic, with tourism, and potentially adversarial ships sailing through under and above the surface. How do we look at Canadian Coast Guard being more of an integrated package with our overall national defense, especially in the Arctic? Because you guys by far have the most capabilities of projecting Canadians' interests and protecting our sovereignty in the Arctic.
Again, we're going to getting into policy stuff, and I'll certainly permit you to respond as you see fit, but it is policy.
I do think that is relevant to.
Oh, it's,
studying, and
I don't,
I do
it's
believe that
relevant
this
to
is
this
something that we
committee.
need to think about.
I agree. It's irrelevant to this, it is relevant to this committee. It's I think the same question's been asked about 3 or 4 times. And I think maybe it's something the committee needs to focus on. But I'll let the question go forward, Mr. O'Rourke, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, from our perspective, the system here in Canada is working well. It's different. Like in any kind of organization, if you will, if you have multiple things and it's all part of the same organization, I'm sure that there can be opportunities. There will also be challenges because what we do, we work very closely with law enforcement and military security partners, and we support them in their mandate. As I mentioned earlier, we have direct roles to play in a lot of the other security elements. We're very much part of the Arctic security discussions, with RCMP, with Canadian forces, with international counterparts, notwithstanding our mandate. So from where I sit, I think that the system is working well and there's really good coordination. Ultimately, I will leave it to others to decide on, responding to perhaps some more the bigger policy question of other advantages. Thank you.
Ambropoulos, 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here with us today. My questions are mostly going to go to Casara. I find it cool. I think this is the first time that I realize that there is a volunteer organization that's also working in partnership with the government to provide search and rescue. I guess my main question, first of all, or not main question, but we've been hearing a lot in this committee about the shortage of labor and the shortage of personnel in the armed forces. But also, we had heard at one point that there was a huge shortage in volunteers. And I'm wondering if you felt that as well. I know that it's very specialized volunteers who can fly planes, but I'm wondering if you've felt that as well, and if it's something that your organization has noticed.
Our membership has gone down a little bit in the past few years, especially with COVID being out there and being an issue. But for the most part, we've been able to get most of the volunteers, I'd say, that we need across the country. If people own an airplane, they like to fly it, and we provide them an opportunity to fly where they get some of their expenses paid. So that helps. And people see aviation as kind of a neat thing to be involved in. So we do get volunteers coming to us. And we also get volunteers from younger people that are pilots that want to have an aviation career, and they see Casara as being a good thing to have on their resumes. So that helps us attract volunteers as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if you've already answered this question at some point in your testimony, but so I apologize if it's a repeat question. But do you do trainings along with the armed forces at all? Is there, because obviously you're doing some of their work and helping them in what they're trying to accomplish. So is there any opportunity for joint trainings, and are people prepared before going out?
Yes, we regularly train with the Air Force, and we have officers that work with our organization across the country, CLOs that they're called, that work with Casara with training our members. We train our members on Hercs, on Twin Otters, on helicopters. Our members go flying with the military, and I work with them on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think I'm going to cut it short, but I'm going to ask one last question. If you could recommend one thing that the Government of Canada could do to help you help them, what would that be?
Well, one thing I would say that I would look into would be for us to be able to purchase aircraft that we could use in search and rescue. We'd like to, there's a model in the United States called CAP. It's a Civil Air Patrol. And the United States government provides them with aircraft, with the funding so that they can train people. They train pilots right from the start to the finish to become a pilot. They do reconnaissance flights for the government in the United States. And that's kind of some of the stuff we're not doing in Canada that we possibly could do if we changed our model and our funding a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Colleagues, we have 10 minutes and 15 minutes worth of questions. We have a hard stop at 1, and there's a lot of us want to go to the Haldimor commemoration. My thought would be a minute and a half, and 3 and 3. And that'll get us to 1 o'clock. So if that's all right, Mr. Desilets, 1.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, Mr. O'Rourke, with this icebreaker saga, if you had to make one recommendation or one potential emergency that you'd like to point out to the Government of Canada, what would it be? Thank you for your question. If you're talking about icebreakers, I would say we need to be given support so that we can meet the schedule that we've planned. Obviously, we are always doing a risk assessment as to when we receive these ships, but it's hoped that we could align our plan with what's happening. Thank you. Mr. Kirsch, there was a ship that transported 60 people, and it went aground in Pequarut. Do you feel that this type of incident could reoccur, and are we sufficiently equipped to meet with such an emergency?
I don't know that we're really equipped to meet all the different emergencies that could happen up in the Arctic right now. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question because it's not quite in our mandate, but.
Madame Matson, minute and a half.
Just in terms of the Arctic and the search and rescue capabilities there, how has climate change impacted your members? And I sort of think of course, there's changing weather itself, but then there's also a lot of the infrastructure problems, landing capabilities, permafrost, that sort of thing. Could you comment on that briefly?
I don't think we're certainly seeing a change because of climate change, and it could impact runways that are normally frozen throughout the year. There's a lot of gravel runways up in the north. So things are going to change with climate change. I don't think it's impacted us too much yet, but it could in the future. Personally, I live in Edmonton. I have flown in the Arctic. I've been to a bunch of places. We've done a number of trips just for our own, I'll say pleasure for lack of a better word, but I've been, to Cambridge Bay and, Nunavut, a bunch of different places up in the Arctic, Inuvik. When we do these trips, we have to plan to have fuel stops and stuff in the places that we're going to and make sure that we're able to carry on. So climate change is going to affect what we're doing there.
Thank you, Madison. Mr. Lewis, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke, for coming back to the second round of questions here. As a former firefighter, volunteer firefighter on the Great Lakes, I worked very closely as a water rescue specialist with our aviation folks. Both the U.S. and Canada's Coast Guards. And so I really sincerely appreciate both Mr. Kirsch and all of his team and what they bring to the north. So my first question to Mr. Kirsch would be this. So this summer I had the honor of being at the Windsor Airport and looking over the graduation of our young men and women, our cadets, of which many unfortunately didn't graduate. I think a lot to do with COVID and in person and not in person. But you talk about a major shortage of pilots in the north. Would this be an opportunity to specifically target the cadets going forward so that you would have those types of resources, sir?
yes, it could be an opportunity. That's why I mentioned the CAP model, because that's what they're doing in the United States. They're bringing up cadets, right through the system to from no aviation knowledge to the point where they become pilots, and pilots that we could be of use to our aviation community in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Kirsch. Earlier in the last round of questionings, Mr. O'Rourke, he had mentioned about having a major labor shortage, specifically to mariners, but we know that to be true across all sectors in all of Canada. So I'm just curious, can you expand then or weigh in a touch on mechanics? Because I realize that it's one thing to have a shortage of pilots, but those same pilots certainly can't fly the planes to do all the important rescuing if we don't have the mechanics. So I'm just curious, could you tell me, I have a private member's bill, it's C-241, coming up here very shortly, and it's for travel deductions for skilled trades. Would that be something that would help our pilots in the north?
Well, you're right. Mechanics is another area of potential shortages coming up. I don't know the exact numbers that are out there for really seeing a huge shortage yet, but it's a potential to happen in future years for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. May, final 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is really to both witnesses, but what unique contributions do the Canadian Rangers make to SAR operations in the remote and isolated regions? Could we better incorporate Rangers in search and rescue efforts, and how can we better incorporate Indigenous knowledge in search and rescue efforts? We'll start with Mr. Kirsch.
We do use Rangers. They are members of our organization. One of the issues that we have is they normally get paid for jobs that they do, but CASERA is a volunteer organization. We don't pay our members. We pay some of their expenses, but they are certainly a part of our organization. Dave, do you want to comment at all about the Rangers?
Sure. We do have our Rangers. Rangers are often used to get a ground response to a humanitarian or RCMP incident. And the one issue we do have with Rangers is they have radios, but their radios are encrypted and they don't have a common public free use. So communications between aircraft and Rangers on the ground is an issue.
And Sir, Mr. O'Rourke?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We do work closely with the Rangers. I would note, however, that for the most part, they may be utilized a bit more in ground search and rescue than maritime search and rescue. That being said, we work with them in exercise, and as an example, last September, we had an exercise in Resolute with the U.S. Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard vessels, and the Rangers were kind of doing a ground search from the shore as we were seeking a missing boater. So we do work closely with them. With regards to your question about incorporating Indigenous knowledge, we try to do that by building auxiliary units that include Inuit members. Most of them are Inuit members in the north, so we leverage it that way. Creating our Arctic region, standing up some of the governance that we have with Inuit First Nations and Métis is also a good way to incorporate that knowledge. And really specifically when we talk about search and rescue, one of the things that we've been doing a lot of work is working with locals to better understand where hunting cabins are, as an example, which are things that only the locals know and really could be constituted as traditional knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that's my time, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to all the witnesses for helping us out today.
Thank you, Mr. May, and Mr. O'Rourke. You're an amazing man. You come out for double duty, so we appreciate it. And Mr. Kirsch, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Ralph, thank you for being with us. A lot of us didn't actually appreciate all of the things that you do, and we appreciate. And on behalf of the people of Canada, thank you. With that, we are adjourned, and we'll be re-empaneled next Thursday, hopefully.